Our next concept in the ecology unit is going to be about ecological succession. So whenever we're talking about succession and ecological succession, what we're saying is it's the process of ecological change in an ecosystem where one community is replaced by another community over time. So a lot of times when you hear succession, you think about it in a historical context with one monarch succeeded another one, which means like basically replaced, right? So in this case, one ecosystem is replacing another. There's going to be two types of succession that we're going to talk about, and that's going to be primary succession and secondary succession. So primary succession is the formation of a brand new ecosystem, whereas a secondary succession is going to be recovery of an old ecosystem. So let's focus in on primary succession to start off with. This is going to occur when a community forms in an area that has not been previously occupied. So we're going to start off with exposed rock, and that might come from lava that cools to create lava rock. It could be melted ice underneath of a glacier that reveals bare rock underneath, eroded sand. All of those things do not have soil, and you are starting on bare rock. This is going to occur over an extremely long period of time. The pioneer species are going to be lichens and moss in primary succession. And what a pioneer species is, it's the first organisms to grow in a new environment. So think about the pioneers. We think of the pioneers as the first people that went out west. Or if somebody's a pioneer in their field, it's the first person to do something. So a pioneer species in succession are the first organisms that would be growing in that area. So for primary succession, since we're starting on bare rock, it's going to be lichens and moss because those things can grow on bare rock. If you're wondering what lichen is, it's this bottom picture here. You can see this a lot on tree bark and on rocks. It's kind of like that blue-green, crusty looking stuff. So these organisms can grow in areas where others cannot, aka on bare rock. So over time, the organisms are going to die and they're going to decompose, and they're going to release nutrients to form a layer of soil that's going to get larger and larger so that more complex plants can grow in it. But because these organisms are so small, lichens and mosses dying is going to take a long time to build up enough soil for other plants. So that's why it takes so long. It's because it's got to build up the soil. So once enough soil has been generated to retain nutrients, small plants, flowers, ferns, and shrubs can begin to grow. So then those plants can further break down the rock, and it's going to allow more soil to be formed and retained. So then that means that the seeds from other plants and even trees can start to grow, and over time the larger plants can inhabit that area. So with species of plants, animals can come in because animals rely on plants to survive. And organisms that are growing in each stage may even hinder their own survival but pave the way for future organisms. So what that means is that sometimes plants can outcompete each other and they die, but then the next generation of plants will come in. So for example, trees provide a lot of shade. And so if I'm a grass, by allowing trees to move in, it's going to eventually shade my area and prevent me from doing photosynthesis. So with primary succession, eventually you're going to have a mature community where there's a little change in the composition of species. So the species are relatively, they're not going to change. And this is called a climax community. So this is the end of succession when you reach this climax community. So if you've had an area that's been untouched for a really, really, really long time, most likely that is a climax community. Here in Kentucky, you can see a climax community in a lot of areas of like the Daniel Boone National Forest, or if you've ever been to Mammoth Cave National Park, the above ground section of that would be considered a climax community where you haven't had any logging or any destruction of trees or anything in a long period of time. Secondary succession is going to occur in an area that was previously occupied by living organisms, but the community was destroyed by a disturbance. So this disturbance could be like a fire, a forest fire, it could be farming, it could be a hurricane, anything that's going to remove the majority of living organisms out of that area. the big difference between primary and secondary succession is that secondary succession still has soil. Because it has soil, it's going to take less time to return back to a climax community because I don't have to rebuild my soil. It's already there. So the pioneer species for secondary succession is going to be different. It's going to be weeds and grasses instead of moss and lichens. So weeds and grasses can grow really quickly. They have a very short lifespan. They reproduce like crazy, and they can grow in a lot of different environments. They're very, very hardy plants. So they are going to be the pioneer species for primary or secondary succession. And eventually we get to those climax communities, which are stable ecosystems. So that's one that remains relatively constant with predictable changes. So you can have slight fluctuations in your populations. However, the species makeup of your area tends to remain the same. So here's a good comparison chart between primary and secondary succession. So remember, primary succession, I'm building a brand new ecosystem from scratch and there is no soil. To where secondary succession, I'm recovering an ecosystem that was there, but I have soil. So a pioneer species for primary succession are mosses and lichens because they can grow directly on rock, whereas the pioneer species for secondary succession are going to be weeds and grasses because there is soil. And both of them are going to end up in a stable climax community. So some examples of primary succession, it has to be something that's starting me off with bare rock. So that can either be a volcano erupting and the lava cools off to make lava rock. It could be a glacier melting that would reveal rock underneath of the ice. For secondary succession, it could be forest fires that burns up all of the plant life but leaves the soil intact. It could be a hurricane that floods all of the soil, the plants in that area, or breaks them off via wind. It could be farming where we burn down or remove all the trees and then till up all the soil that had all of the grasses in it. So an analogy for this would be with primary succession. This is where you're baking cookies from scratch. So you have to take flour, butter, sugar, etc. It's going to take a longer time because you have to make the dough, right? So primary succession takes longer because you have to make the soil. Secondary succession is like baking cookies with a pre-made dough. It takes less time because I already have the dough made. So in this case, the dough is referring to the soil. Because secondary succession starts off with soil, it's going to take less time because the soil is already there.